I think probably to start off saying a little bit about performance. As you can see from the paper, after a challenging December, we did better in January, but we're having significant issues in February and now into March. Those issues, what's happening behind that, is clearly an underlying problem with flu. That the decrease in flu has not been as quick as we would like to see, and during the month of February, the position was pretty stable at around 2,500 confirmed flu patients in our beds at any one time. And every day we had new patients being admitted, so it wasn't a length of stay issue on flu, although they did spend longer in hospital than other admissions. We are now starting to see that decrease. But it's really only since last Thursday, last Friday, that the numbers have started to go down. So a significant impact from flu right across the month. At the same time, we had a number of spikes as far as norovirus was concerned. And we had the issue of the cold weather, which I think has been well documented. I think what that has meant in essence is that even though demand over the period has been flat, we did also see a year-on-year increase in demand as far as February is concerned, and the overall picture were heavily congested hospitals and a real issue with patients who were staying 21 days plus. And it was as a result of that congestion that clearly we had problems at the front door in trying to deliver against the 4-hour target. The point that I would like to make is that if you look at the data, you will see that despite all of those issues, we did see more patients within 4 hours than the previous year. And actually there's an increase of 1.8% in February. And the other bit of the picture is that at the same time emergency admissions were up 2% for patients who were staying more than 1 day, but 7.8% for 0 length of stay. So I think what I would say on performance is that, look, we wanted performance to be better than that, but I think the system worked very, very hard with the resources it had, with the capacity it had during the month to deliver that level of performance. Maybe to draw the board's attention then to a couple of other things within the system, which I think we have to acknowledge the excellent performance around. The first thing that we've set out in the paper is 111 and the number of 111 calls, the significant increase, and we've set out the numbers for you there. But I think in summary it means something like a 15% increase each day on the number of calls being taken by 111, and really important, the level of clinical input. That this time last year we were somewhere around 20%, now we're up around 46-47%, and I think that has had a real impact. And I know it's always hard to sort of look at the counterfactual, but I think to think about what the system would have been like if 111 hadn't been able to rise to that challenge, and in particular the clinical input. And you know, I can honestly say that on a day-to-day basis, even working with our ambulance services, they have been able to pinpoint when we've had a higher level of clinical input into 111 and when the input has been lower. So I think it's having a real advantage at this point. On the subject of ambulance services, the implementation of the new standards has definitely freed up clinical time for us. And then I think the other thing I would draw everybody's attention to is the DTOC and numbers. That clearly, while we do have a significant problem with overall patients staying more than 21 days, we have managed over this period to free up the equivalent of 1,900 beds from the work that's been done on DTOC. So all of those things have contributed to us being able to work hard and to support our clinicians in trying to keep patients safe during the period. I think the final thing that I would want to just comment on is moving forward. And I think it's probably, it seems a bit strange to be actually sort of talking about moving forward, because we still feel as if we're still very much in the middle of winter. We're hoping that last weekend was the sort of closing down of winter from a weather point of view, but we're not absolutely sure about that. But I think what we have been doing week on week, month on month, over the period is learning from what's been happening and then using that to inform our plan for the coming year. So a few things, and again it is set out at the end of the board paper on looking forward. The first thing I would say is actually, this is under priorities, point 15. I would probably start with the last point there, demand and capacity planning. I think we are very clear across NHSI and NHSE that we really have to focus on getting our capacity plan right at this point. I've just come from a meeting in NHSE where that's being discussed, and I think we've talked about it here, and that we need to be very realistic about the level of resource that we have available to us within the NHS. In particular, I would say the level of nursing resource, if Ruth doesn't mind me saying that, because I think that was the real issue that limited our capacity during the winter period. It wasn't money as such, but it was an ability to be able to staff wards, etc. So I think we have to start off looking at the capacity that we have, and we have to look at what actually happened from an emergency care point of view, and we need to plan our elective work alongside that and not work on the basis that every month is the same. And I think a lot of work is going to go into that across both organisations over the course of the coming month. So that's the first thing I would focus on. The second thing is going back to my comments about 21-day plus patients, but actually length of stay full stop. And I think this is somewhere where we feel we do have opportunities. And I think that that'll be a major theme of our transformation work moving forward for this year, focusing on how we can ensure patients do not stay in hospital for any longer than they need to. And we all know that patients don't really want to stay in hospital any longer, and that it is not clinically the best thing for a patient either. So a big focus on that. The third area is building on the work that we did this year around streaming. And I think the board will probably remember that we talked about introducing GP streaming at the front of our emergency departments, which would mean that if you turned up with minor illness, you could be streamed to the care of a GP rather than be cared for within the emergency department. Over this period, we have managed to roll out GP streaming to every emergency department in the country that we feel could benefit by it. We had set ourselves a target of about 15% of patients being streamed. We haven't quite met that target, and we want to finish the work in the coming year. But ultimately, we want it to mean that we don't have any minor breaches. So if you go to an emergency department with minor illness or a minor injury, that you always receive your care in a prompt fashion, and certainly within 4 hours. And then I think the final thing is recognising that different organisations, different systems, not just trusts across the country, have different strengths and different weaknesses at this point, and we need to be able to look at the performance of all of them and not just apply the same criteria across the board. So looking to the work of some of our organisations that are better placed to deliver as to what they can do within their local systems, etc. I was with some of the ICSs yesterday, and that was the exact issue we were talking about. And then at the same time supporting the people who are the most vulnerable and continuing the work from last year. So that's my very quick run through of the paper after running down the road.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Richard?
Just one specific on what's worked and what hasn't worked, and I was interested in that. I think it's paragraph 8 and 9 in your paper, Pauline. It seemed to me to imply the targeted support hadn't really worked that well at the bottom of the scale, the worst performers. Now, am I reading too much into that? And if I'm not, why?
I think it's variable. So as far as our worst performers are concerned, the targeted support that went into those organisations, as you can imagine, the first part of that work was to really understand the issues within the organisation and within the wider system as to why they couldn't deliver. I think where we have got to with those is a good diagnostic, and the work at this point is about how we take that forward. So I think when you say it hasn't worked, I think maybe for some of those we haven't solved the problems yet, but I think for the majority we have identified what needs to be done, and that is very different in different systems. Like if we take one of our systems in the northeast, there the issue is a fundamental medical staffing issue. And we have identified that. It doesn't mean we have resolved it. We have managed to put some temporary support in over this period, but it is by no means fixed. Whereas if we move to, say, one of our systems in Midlands and East, we have been very clear from the work we've done that it's a system-wide issue, and that each bit of the system needs to do something different in order for the emergency department to deliver. So I think for the worst performing organisations, that's where we are.
So
on
for the
journey.
worst ones, it's not just they need a bit more help and be told how to do stuff.
No,
It's
some of them
actually-
need fundamentals.
It's fundamental
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah. Fundamental
and your
change.
targeted
Yeah.
intervention ain't going to turn that around in a few months. Is that?
I think where we have got to, because obviously we've been working with them for some time, is that we're very clear that something fundamental needs to happen. It's not just, like with the second group of systems, it was really working with them through ESOP around improvement. And you go into an organisation, you work with them, you teach them how to do red and green days, and you start to see an improvement. The most fragile system, it's not that straightforward.
Ruth, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to come on 2 points. Obviously, I'll talk about nursing, but I just want to say thank you to everybody out in the service. It's the chief exec, directors. They are really working 7 days a week. You see clinical directors, actually porters. They're
everything.
out there. They are working their socks off this winter in all sorts of conditions. But you're right, Pauline, we haven't had sufficient nurses. We know we've got a vacancy level, which we've talked about previously at this board. NHSI's response, I know Ian spoke at Jane Cummings, our CNO's summit a couple of weeks ago, talking about our retention programme and how we want to industrialise that. So you'll know that we're doing it about all mental health trusts, and only a third of the acute. We want to make sure now we roll that up to everyone that we're able to offer it to. And also then working jointly with Cathy, how we support you, Pauline, and more importantly the trust with retaining in their urgent care pathway. So it's a much more the multi-professional role. Retention's got to be a huge issue for us.
Yes.
I'm pleased that yesterday's pay announcement for Agenda for Change, and I hope that will improve morale and help us to maintain. And of course, we will after Easter, just after Christmas, I was going to say, just after Easter, work on a launch of a sickness collaborative to support 63 of our organisations with the highest sickness rates, to try and reduce that then by 1% over the next 2 years. But then the most important bit out of that as well is about how we lead much more of a multi-professional roles to some of our care pathways, not just doctors and just nurses. We need to think about what nurses are doing to allow nursing to do nursing, and for those our very, very precious support staff, and making sure that they're working to do what they're upskills, so everybody's working at the top of their licence. So yes, I'm working very closely with Jane Cummings, the chief nurse in NHS England, the CNO, to support Pauline on this.
Okay. Sigan?
Well, it was a question that was triggered really by this discussion about nursing and the recent pay. Do we have a sense of how many nurses are out there who could potentially be brought back into the system quite quickly because they had, under current conditions and under the recent pay freezes and things, have elected to do other things in life but who could actually, with a little bit of an incentive now and some initiatives of the kind you described, maybe be brought back much faster than you could start by cranking the machine at the other end. Well, have you had a look at that?
Yes, we have, absolutely. And some of the work that we've been supporting Dale on around the agency work over the last couple of years is how we have moved people from agency into bank and then into substantive. And that's been very successful. And it's month on month, you can see that going in the right direction. I think pay is one part of the issue, but it's not only part of the issue.
Yes.
Part of this is about flexibility of rostering, and Pat has quite rightly challenged through his reporting how the e-rostering and some of the support. So our work with Oxford Directorate is very close, and some of our people are working in both parts to support people to maximise the productivity of nurses to allow them to nurse.
Because it's a tragedy. There are all these people out there who have all the capabilities and experience. We could only bring them back.
And we are welcoming back lots of nurses all the time. What we need to do is to retain as many also.
Kathy, and then Pat wants to come.
Yeah, so a few comments from me. So first is that I think that we should acknowledge that the planning and the preparation for this winter was probably better than any before, and I think people out in the service do acknowledge that, and they've worked in systems, and Pauline's led that extremely well. But if I'm struck by the graph in the thing, is that whilst we've managed remarkably well given the challenges of this particular one, if you go back to 12-13, we've got quite a long way to get back to 12-13. So we've done it before. We've got more patients coming now.
Yeah.
We know it's more challenging. We've had flu and all sorts of things. But I think we just have to acknowledge that is one thing. But it seems to me that we also this winter got to start to get a much better handle on the things that keep patients safe as well. And I would, we know we need to build on all of that going forward. And I think build on the work that's happened this year, but do it really, really early, because we always talk about we'll do it early, but early it's never too early. And for some organisations, and like Ruth, like Pauline, like Dido, like everyone else, I've been out to loads and loads. They know what needs to happen, but we almost kind of go back and it needs to happen, and actually we kind of need to make the changes happen. And I think we need to really absolutely make those take place early. June, July, not.
Yes.
September, October, November.
Yes.
Otherwise, we will be back. We will be back in the trust next year, saying, well, this front entrance is no good. This flow's no good. The leadership aren't involved. We've got to grasp it really, because I think we've got a really good baseline to build on from this year. Yeah.
Well said. Pat, you wanted to come in?
Well, just to support, my sense going around is what you said, the attitude out there has changed. People are getting out and trying to get ahead of it at least. I mean, now to Kathy's point, whether they are is the challenge. I suppose probably a couple of questions really is where we have demand up at one point or increase at one point. What I've never known is what we expect. So it seems to me whenever we report, we seem surprised that it's up. Well, so what I'd be keen to get guidance on, probably for next year, is what we expect.
Yes.
And do we have any sense of the difference between volume and acuity?
Yeah.
So if next year we don't have norovirus and we don't have flu, presumably, for reading your report, it's going to go swimmingly.
I'm not so sure about the swimming like that.
But you see the point. I mean, I think the point is that we mustn't be blind to the press comment, the continual press comment on this, and the confidence of the public in our ability to deal with it. And in a sense, we're partly judged on what we expect. If we continue to look as if we're taken by surprise, it's another winter and another surprise. The sort of Dido's learning point is there.
And just the track.
Yeah, and finally, I don't know whether we can at some point, probably offline or on this. I'd love to see a presentation of what excellence looks like.
Yeah.
The workflow.
Yeah.
In a really crackerjack place, and I'd like to go and stand in it next winter, and also I'd like to see what a dog looks like. No names, But to just stand there and say, what are the bookends in this, so that we all understand. It's very good hypothetically, but these are complex workflows.
Yeah, we can show
And
that.
yeah, I think if we can get those, then I think it would just certainly
Yeah.
help
Do,
our
do you think it would be a good subject matter for a teach-in on a board sort of evening to just take us through both, Pauline? I think it would be. You and I talked about it yesterday, didn't we?
Yeah,
That
we
just being
absolutely
really clear, because I think you have got a very clear
Yeah,
view
we were
of
very
what
clear.
excellent looks like and also what really challenged
Yes.
looks like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
make sure that we all understand that,
I
and
think
then
it'd be
we're
really
all
good.
able to
Be good.
reinforce it.
Yeah.
By all
Yeah.
means.
Okay. Any other comments?
Just to reiterate, I think the point that was just made by Pat, really, and it is predictable that we will face more demand from demographic change.
Yeah.
We're seeing, as I was discussing with the Health Select Committee a couple of days ago, we're seeing a population that's ageing. That's a good thing. People are living longer, so that's
Yeah.
good. But by definition, therefore, when you talk to clinicians, we're seeing more frail people and more people with long-term conditions, and that with the same next winter, only a bit more. And so that's the planning assumption. It's where the operational planning for the right level of capacity and the clinical practice changes that we know work, picking up on that last point, have to come together. And that's why
Yeah,
that's right.
the next period is going to be really important in preparing for next winter, not to leave it to any allocation of monies like late in the year. That's the wrong answer. So I think if we do nothing, we will see further pressure in our hospitals, and we shouldn't be surprised by that. So the message I think we're all giving, Pauline will be at the heart of this, is it starts from proper capacity planning and looks locally at what you have had, and it does vary around the country. We see some places that do have different demographics than the others, so some places are actually seeing a reduction. A few places are actually seeing a reduction in demand, but that's unusual. But the most general position is one of continual rising demand, and therefore that's the basis on which we need to plan. And then you have to plan your capacity and your clinical practice around that. And that seems like the answer here, really. I know it's not easy,
Agree.
but the priority attached to that, I think, is really clear.
Yeah.
And to do it early enough
Yeah.
so that the people engaged in this, our workforce, are able to plan their lives early enough as well. And that's the retailer in me says we just have to do this far, far earlier than the services used to. If you expect people to
Yes.
reconfigure how they're going to work their Christmas, New Year, January and
Yes.
February, because that's actually what we need to do.
Because while we hope we don't get the same level of flu pressure next year, we know nonetheless the population will be that much older and frailer next
Yes.
year, and we need to respond to it.
And Christmas will come
I
again.
would
It
just
certainly will.
I think I would just finish by saying that I think what I find very encouraging at this point after a very difficult winter is really the commitment from NHSI and NHSE. I think it's from both to do proper capacity planning and to recognise
Really good.
that over the course of this coming month it'll be really hard work for us, but we need to get people out there on the shop floor at the front line to engage in that work, and that we need to allow them to face reality and to give us this reality and then decide how we're going to take it forward. So I'm encouraged by that.
Good. Excellent.
Great.